Hello everyone, Tom with Capo Fetish. Today on the channel we're going to talk about the first albums we ever purchased that we brought to the counter and paid with cash and took them home and played them. So when I first started listening to records, acquiring records, usually I would get albums passed on from brothers and sisters or friends of friends. But these are the first 10 records, I believe, in chronological order that I went to the counter and paid with allowance money. 50 cents, a dollar, whatever. So first, this is the first album I remember going to the counter and plopping down 2 quarters for. It is the Monkees, Pisces, Aquarius, Capricorn, Jones limited album. I remember a couple of the songs on here when I flipped through the albums, one being the Pleasant Valley Sunday and Words. We had that single growing up. Great single, A and B side. And at the time, the Monkees were on reruns in the early 70s. I can't recall the Monkees' first run on TV. I was too young. I was like in diapers. But by the time the early 70s, I was around 5, 6, and really just watching these reruns every single day and just lapping up all that Monkees music. And I also acquired the first 3 Monkees albums from my sister. She, of course, wasn't listening to that anymore, so I was playing those to death. So, of course, when I went to the record store and wanted to, plop down my own money for an album, I chose this album because I was familiar with the Monkees. And it's a fine record, really pretty strong. A lot of people like Headquarters. I think if I had to pick one favorite Monkees album, this would be it. A lot of great tracks on here. Love Is Only Sleeping, She Hangs Out, The Door into Summer, great stuff. Star Collector, of course, the singles Pleasant Valley Sunday and Words, the flip side. Yeah, I believe this is the first album I ever plopped down any money for. And on the back here, you can see it's 50 cents. So I bought this at a record store in Woodland Hills called Rogers Record Store. They had a huge selection of used records back then. And back then, used records were next to nothing. They were like a quarter, 50 cents. So that was one of the first ones. Another group, too, I think this may have been my second one I ever bought with my own money. Another 50-cent used record was the Lovin' Spoonful's Daydream. At one point, I think I acquired every Lovin' Spoonful album from that store, Rogers Record Store. Played this one to death. I think it's still one of their great albums. Daydream, Day Blues, Didn't Want to Have to Do It, You Didn't Have to Be So Nice, just chock full of great songs. So that's another one. Sometimes we would go as a family, we would go to a department store or a drugstore. I'd always head towards the record section. It seemed like there was always a cutout bin at a drugstore back then or a department store. So I'd always end up filing through these records. I didn't even know what these records were. Sometimes I just picked them randomly. This one may have been like $1. I may have picked this up at Thrifty or Save On drugstores. And this is Gary Lewis and the Playboys. You Don't Have to Paint Me a Picture. Not a great album, but when you're 5 and 6, you play albums nonstop if you're into music. On this album, he does versions of Wild Thing. He does, what else does he do? Sloop John B. Not a great album. I don't think I've played it in nearly 50 years, but I kept it just for the nostalgic reasons. So this is another one I think I picked up for $1, plopped $1 down on the counter for. Same for this one here, the Dave Clark 5, a very nondescript album here. This is probably after their initial success, an album called Satisfied With You. Played this a lot back on my little Sears Silvertone record player back in the early 70s. Don't think I've played one bit of it in about 50 years, but that was another one. I think that may have been $1 or so in the cutout bin at one of those drugstores. It was a used record store, actually kind of half used, half new, little tiny record store in Canoga Park on Topanga Canyon. Back in the early to mid 70s, the record store was called Sunshine Records. And they'd always have all these brand new promo copies of records. And I remember going in there and finding a new promo copy of the Kink Chronicles back in the summer of 72. I was just really starting to get into the Kinks. I had a lot of their early albums, their American versions of Kink Size and the Greatest Hits and the Live Kinks album. But this here too highlighted a lot of things I've never heard before. Of course, I heard Victoria from the Arthur album and Lola, but even at 7 years old, I didn't know what any of these songs were, but I loved all of them. And it was such an eclectic mix of Kink songs from 66 through 71. great stuff. Picked it up and played it to death. It's unplayable now. I have other versions I've picked up over the years, but this is one of the first albums too I ever purchased with my own money. I think it was only $2 back in 1972 from the Sunshine Record store in Topanga Canyon, Canoga Park. Back in 1973, I noticed that when I would go to Kmart or go to Zodi's, those kind of department stores, I noticed that there were these two new Beatles collection albums, the 1962 through 66, 67 through 70, the red and blue album, basically. Really attractive looking albums. I remember seeing the blue album and just wanting it for months. I remember saving up tons of allowance, 50 cents here, a quarter here, a dollar there. And I remember I was about 8 years old. I believe it was the last day of school in 8th grade. And I had my mom take me to this department store called the Treasury in Woodland Hills. I saved up $8 for this album. And I couldn't believe it when I finally bought it. I love this album so much. The Beatles Blue Album, 67 through 70. Played it so much I can't even play this copy anymore. It's scratched to death. But I remember being so excited getting this album back in 1973, and it was one of the first brand new albums I ever bought with cellophane on it. Had the hype sticker on the back. So yeah, that was a very exciting time buying a double album, brand new, with the cellophane on it. Of course, it was scratched in no time because I didn't know how to take care of records back then, but that was probably my first brand new album I ever bought. About 1974, a store opened up in Canoga Park called Licorice Pizza. Remember, there was a lot of incense burning in there. It smelled great. It had all this kind of wood all around it. Very, 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 very cool record store. And I remember they had a very big cutout bin. And I remember my sister pointing this out. You should buy this album. This would be cool. And it was the Beach Boys' Carl and the Passion So Tough with a bonus Pet Sounds album included. Never heard Pet Sounds before. This is the first time I heard Pet Sounds. I must have been about maybe 9 years old in 74. Loved Pet Sounds. Never could quite get into So Tough until later on. But I remember playing this to death as well and scratching it to death. And that was another, probably my second new album I ever bought. Of course, it was a cutout right there, you could see. So that was another new album I bought, one of my first ones. And another thing that was big back then, there was a lot of Beach Boy albums in cutout bins. And there was this label called Pickwick, and really cheap label, putting out these really dodgy sounding Beach Boys albums. One of them was called Wow Great Concert. You could see here, 2 for $3. They were like $1.50 each. This is basically just a substandard version of the Beach Boys in concert, the album from '64, but still loved it, played it to death. And I always remember the sound on these Pickwick releases being really, really bad, but I couldn't really tell back then. Now, if I put it on, I can tell night and day between that and an official release. Along with that album, I remember buying, it was 2 for $3. And this real shoddy collection here called Little Disc Coupe, with a lot of their early songs like 409, Custom Machine Drive-In, Little Honda. Just really bad sound, but you don't really notice that when you're a kid playing it on a little tiny Sears Silvertone record player. And one of the first Beatle albums of the official U.S. catalog, should I say, that I ever bought was Revolver, the U.S. version here. Bought this back in 1974. Still have the sticker on it. It was $3.38. This is on the Apple label here, as you can see. And I didn't know at the time that 3 songs were missing from it until I went over to a friend's house when I was in about 3rd grade, and his brother was playing the British version of Revolver, and it blew me away that I'm Only Sleeping, Dr. Robert, and what's the other one? I'm Only Sleeping, Dr. Robert. What is the 3rd track there missing that was on Yesterday and Today? Anyway, I was blown away that those 3 songs were featured on the original version. I didn't know that was the official version until later. So good stuff there. And then one of my first more mature, should I say, picks that I bought brand new back in 1974 at Moby Disc, when it was originally on Victory Boulevard. It originally was on Victory, and then it moved to Ventura Boulevard, was Elton John's Madman Across the Water. Played this a lot back in the day. And those are about I recall about the first 10 albums I think I ever bought with my own money. What were the first 10 you ever bought? Let me know in the comments section. I'd like to know. As always, thanks for watching. If you dig the content, press subscribe. We'll talk to you soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.